Hey everyone, in this video I want to introduce you to the idea of inverse functions. We'll talk about what inverse functions are and what they can be used for in this pre-calculus course and in your future calculus courses. So what exactly is an inverse function? Well, to better understand this, let's create a graph of a function. Remember that a function is just a mathematical transformation that plots one output for one specific input. Also remember that we could denote functions as f of x, that is a function of x. Well, let's imagine that we have a function 6x plus 2, and graphically we can see that the output grows with the input like so. Well, inverse functions take this idea and reverse it. By that, I mean that we are given this end of the box, the output of the box, we are asked to solve for the input. So, if we think about this in terms of the domain and range, just as a note, if you are still a little unclear on the domain and range, I will link a video in the description below that should clear up any confusion you may have. So, in this problem, we have the domain of all real numbers, as there are no inputs to this particular function that will cause a negative under a square root or a divide by zero situation. Therefore, in this domain blob, we have all real numbers. Applying our 6x plus 2 formula to all these values in our domain will give us our range, which is all the y values that our function will give us. So, you can think of each input in our domain mapping to an output in our range. So, what does this have to do with inverse functions? Well, what if we want to go the other way? I'm saying that we have our range values for our y, and we want to know the function that will give us our domain. So, by applying our inverse function to our range of outputs, we can find the inputs that is mapped to that output. As you can see here, we denote the inverse function as f of x to the power of negative 1. But how do we do all this? Well, let's write out our f of x equation. So, we have y, or f of x, is equal to 6x plus 2. Well, since we want to know what x values a certain y value gives up, let's just rearrange our equation here and solve for x. So, we have y minus 2 divided by 6. Now, I think this is where some students get confused. At this point, it is common to flip the x and the y value, as our former y term is now going to be an input and our former x value is now going to be an output. So, let's just write here a more formal rule for finding the inverse of a function. Let's say that we solve for x, then step 2, once we solve for x, then x becomes our output. Therefore, it is our dependent variable, and y is our independent variable. Therefore, we typically switch our x and our y, and that is it. Well, that's pretty cool, right? So, we already did step 1 earlier. We solved for our x value. Now, we just need to switch x and y. Now, let's prove that the inverse function actually works. If we apply our input of 1 to our original equation, then we receive an output of 8. If we apply an input of 8 to our inverse function, well, we receive 1. We can validate our inverse function is correct by writing a composite function like so. So we begin with x and our function outputs y. Well, if we take that output y and map that to our value using our inverse function, well, we get x back. So if we apply our inverse function to our regular function, we should just receive x back, right? So anywhere in our original function that we see an x, we just replace it with our inverse function. And wouldn't you know, we just end up with x as expected. Likewise, we can do this in the opposite way. So if we insert our function as an input to our inverse function, we will receive our x back out just the same as we did before. We should now ask ourselves, well, do all functions have an inverse function? Unfortunately, no, and we are going to talk about this and how inverse functions look graphically more in the next few videos, so be sure to check those out. Thank you for checking out this video, and I hope it helped your understanding of what an inverse function is and how we can find an inverse function. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and consider checking out our Patreon page to support the channel. However, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns about the information I provided in this video, please leave a comment down below and I will do my best to address your concerns.